I stood at the front door of Simone's upscale house, our house, once, with a small suitcase in one hand and a heavy weight in my chest. 2 days before Easter, and here I was, invited by her mother for a brunch she said would keep things civil. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming jasmine, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. Last night, my phone had lit up with a text from Simone, 6 words that hit like a sledgehammer. I want a divorce. It's over. No call, no explanation, just those cold words staring back at me. I'd read them over and over, hoping for some hidden meaning, but there was none. She'd ended us with a text, like I was some delivery order she could cancel. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip on the suitcase, and rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, too loud for the quiet morning. I half expected Simone to answer, maybe to look me in the eye and say something, anything, but it was her mother, Ellen, who opened the door. She smiled, warm but strained, and ushered me in. "Grant, it's good you came," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, stepping into the foyer, the familiar hardwood cool under my shoes. The house looked different now, new art on the walls, a sleek chandelier that screamed money. It wasn't the home we'd built together anymore. Ellen led me toward the dining room, but before we got there, I heard Simone's voice from down the hall, sharp and carefree. "He's too poor. I can't waste my time. I have an elite circle." Then laughter, loud and cruel, followed by other voices joining in. My feet stopped moving. The suitcase felt heavier, like it was anchoring me to the floor. She knew I was here. Ellen had told her I was coming. She just didn't care. I stood there, frozen, my pulse loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to walk in, to say something, to ask why she'd turned into this person who could laugh at me like that. But I didn't. I swallowed the hurt, let it sit like a stone in my throat. Ellen glanced at me, her face tight with embarrassment, but she didn't say anything. She just motioned for me to follow her to the guest room where I'd be staying. I walked behind her, the laughter still echoing in my head. The room was small but neat, with a single bed and a window overlooking the garden. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor. Simone's words kept replaying. Too poor, elite circle. I'd always known she cared about status more than I did. But this was something else. This was her rewriting who I was, turning me into some failure she could toss aside. I thought about the years we'd spent together, her smile when we'd moved into this house, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch with a book. Where had that Simone gone? I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden she'd once loved tending. Now it was manicured by professionals, every flower in perfect rows. Like her life now, curated, polished, empty of anything real. I could hear the clink of dishes from the dining room, the murmur of voices setting up for tomorrow's brunch. I wasn't sure I could face it, sitting across from her while she pretended I didn't exist. But I'd come this far. I'd show up, keep my head down, and get through it. Not for her, but for me. Because I wasn't the one who'd thrown us away with a text message. I wasn't the one laughing in the hallway, tearing down someone I'd promised to love. I pulled out my phone, half tempted to text her back, to ask what I'd done to deserve this. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my banking app, just to ground myself. The numbers were there, steady as always, my investments, my accounts, my life's work. She didn't know about any of it. To her, I was just a guy with a beat-up car and no ambition. Maybe that's why she'd stopped seeing me. Maybe that's why she thought she could hurt me and walk away clean. I locked my phone and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'd sit at her table, eat her food, and listen to whatever she had to say. I wouldn't fight, wouldn't argue. I'd just be there, the man she didn't know anymore. And when it was over, I'd leave maybe not just the house, but all of this. Because standing in that hallway, hearing her laugh, I realized something. I didn't want to be part of her world anymore. Not if it meant losing who I was. I woke up in the guest room, the morning light creeping through the blinds, painting thin stripes across the floor. My suitcase sat untouched by the door, like I hadn't fully committed to being here. Simone's house, her world, felt like a foreign country now. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together how we'd ended up like this. Yesterday's laughter still stung, her voice calling me too poor, looping in my head. I got up, splashed water on my face, and pulled on a clean shirt. No point dwelling on it. I'd face today and figure out the rest later. As I made my way to the kitchen, I thought about the woman I'd married. Simone used to be different, full of life, not just chasing it. We'd met at a bookstore, of all places. She was flipping through a travel guide, talking to herself about hiking in Peru someday. I'd made a dumb joke about llamas, and she laughed so hard she dropped the book. That was the Simone I fell for. Warm, curious, real. But somewhere along the way, she changed. It started small, a new friend here, a fancy event there. Then it snowballed. She got addicted to the spotlight, to being seen. Brunches became photo shoots. Vacations turned into content for her social media. She started caring more about who was watching than what she was actually doing. I didn't fit into that picture. I'm a financial engineer, not a performer. My work is quiet, methodical, algorithms, market trends, long-term plays. I don't flash cash or chase clout. To Simone, that made me invisible. She didn't know I'd built a fortune over the years, piece by careful piece. My net worth was $312 million, spread across investments, real estate, and a few startups I'd backed early. But I never told her. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't matter to me the way it would have to her. I drove a 10-year-old sedan, wore jeans that had seen better days. My life was simple because I liked it that way. In the kitchen, I poured myself a coffee, the machine humming softly. The house was quiet, but I could feel its pulse. Simone's life, her brand, everywhere. The marble counters gleamed under recessed lights. A stack of glossy magazines sat on the island, her face on one of them, smiling like she had it all figured out. I sipped my coffee, bitter and too hot, and thought about how she'd rewritten our story. To her, I was the guy who didn't keep up, who didn't want enough. She didn't see the nights I spent studying markets, the deals I closed while she was at some gala. She didn't know about the scholarships I funded or the nonprofits I supported. To her, wealth was loud, designer bags, private chefs, a life that screamed success. To me, it was freedom. I didn't need a mansion to prove I'd made it. I'd grown up watching my parents stretch every dollar, saving for rainy days that always seemed to come. That taught me to be careful, to plan, to build something that lasted. Simone saw my caution as failure. She wanted a husband who'd match her Instagram aesthetic, not one who'd rather read a balance sheet than pose for a selfie. I heard footsteps behind me. Ellen, Simone's mom, carrying a tray of pastries. "You're up early," she said, her smile kind but tired. I nodded, setting my mug down. Couldn't sleep much. She didn't ask why, just started arranging the tray for brunch. I wondered what she thought of Simone now, of this house that felt more like a showroom than a home. Did she see her daughter slipping away, too? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I helped her carry plates to the dining room, where a long table was already set with flowers and crystal glasses. Everything was perfect, like a stage for Simone's next performance. I thought about tomorrow, about sitting through her brunch with her new friends, all of them probably as polished as she was now. I didn't belong here, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I didn't want it. My world was spreadsheets and quiet wins, not champagne toasts and fake laughs. Simone thought she'd outgrown me, but maybe I'd just never fit into her game. As I set down a stack of napkins, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She could call me poor, laugh me off, rewrite our past. But I knew who I was. I'd built something real, something she'd never understand because it didn't come with a hashtag. And maybe that was enough, for now at least. Easter brunch was like stepping into a movie set I hadn't auditioned for. The dining room was a sea of white linen, gold-rimmed plates, and flowers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music blending with the clink of champagne flutes. Simone had outdone herself, or rather, her event planner had. I sat at the far end of the table, tucked between a potted fern and an empty chair, like an afterthought. Across from me, Simone glowed in a cream-colored dress, her hair swept up like she was posing for a magazine. Her new friends filled the seats around her: Ava, a real estate influencer with a laugh like a chime; Mason, a hedge fund guy who kept checking his watch; and Bianca, a lifestyle vlogger who filmed everything, even the butter dish. They were all so polished, so loud, their voices bouncing off the high ceilings. I kept my head down, focusing on the plate in front of me, some kind of quiche with a name I couldn't pronounce. Ellen had insisted I come, said it'd be good for everyone to stay connected. I wasn't so sure. The air felt thick with pretense, and I could feel Simone's eyes avoiding me, like I was a stain she didn't want her guests to notice. The champagne kept flowing, and the conversation turned to vacations, investments, who'd been seen where. I stayed quiet, cutting my food into smaller and smaller bites. Then Simone's voice cut through the chatter, bright and deliberate. "I have an announcement," she said, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone turned to her, glasses pausing midair. I'm starting fresh. New beginnings, new energy. She paused, letting the words sink in, then sighed dramatically, her gaze flicking toward me for a split second. I divorced Grant. He's just too poor. I can't waste my prime years on someone who's allergic to ambition. Laughter erupted, sharp and sudden, like a flock of birds taking off. Ava clapped a hand over her mouth, Mason smirked, and Bianca's phone tilted slightly, probably catching the moment for her followers. I felt my face burn, not with shame, but with something else, anger, maybe, or just disbelief. She'd said it so casually, like I was a punchline she'd rehearsed. I set my fork down, my hand steady even though my pulse wasn't. The table kept laughing, their voices blending into a hum. Ellen, seated near Simone, looked down at her plate, her lips pressed tight. No one else seemed to notice me or care. I could have stood up, walked out, let the door slam behind me. But I didn't. I stayed, my eyes on the quiche, counting the flecks of green in it, parsley, maybe, or chives. Inside, though, something shifted, like a gear clicking into place. Simone thought she'd won, thought she could erase me with a smirk and a toast. She didn't know me, not the real me. She saw a guy in faded jeans, a guy who didn't care about her elite circle. She didn't see the work I'd done, the wealth I'd built, the life I'd chosen. I wasn't here to prove anything to her, but sitting there, listening to her laugh, I realized I wasn't invisible. Not to myself. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my palm. The laughter died down, and the conversation moved on. Someone was talking about a yacht now, or a new gallery opening. I glanced at Simone, just once. She was smiling, but it looked brittle, like she was performing for a crowd that might turn on her. I wondered if she felt it, the hollowness of all this. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I didn't. She'd made her choice, and she'd made it loud. The quartet started a new song, something slow and mournful. I pushed my plate away, the quiche barely touched. I didn't belong here, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I didn't want to play her game. I'd get through this brunch, shake hands, say my goodbyes. Then I'd go back to my world, where things made sense, where I didn't need to shout to be heard. Simone could have her stage, her applause, her new beginnings. I'd keep what I'd always had, myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was more than enough. Back at my loft that night, the city hummed outside my window. Car horns, distant voices, the pulse of life moving on. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting soft blue light across the room. My investment dashboard was open, charts ticking along like a heartbeat. Stocks, bonds, real estate trusts, a clean energy fund I'd backed in Norway, an AI startup in Berlin. All of it was there, steady and growing. My net worth sat quietly in the corner of the screen, $312 million. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and let out a long breath. Simone's voice from brunch kept creeping into my head. Too poor, allergic to ambition. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt wrong. Like she was talking about someone else, someone I'd never been. I clicked over to my philanthropic trust account, the one I used for scholarships, disaster relief, microloans in places most people never thought about. Last week, I'd sent $50,000 to a school in rural India for new textbooks. The week before, I'd covered medical supplies for a clinic in Haiti. No press releases, no photo ops, just quiet moves that made a difference. That's who I was. Not the guy Simone laughed at. I thought back to our early days, when she'd tease me for staying up late with my spreadsheets. "You're such a nerd," she'd say, but she'd smile, proud of how focused I was. Back then, I thought she got it, my need to build something real, something that lasted. But as her world got louder, mine stayed quiet. I studied markets while she chased parties. I timed investments while she timed her Instagram posts. I didn't need a Rolex or a corner office to know I was winning. My success was in the numbers, in the lives I'd touched without asking for applause. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. My loft was small, just a bedroom, a kitchen, and this desk piled with books and notepads. No marble counters, no chandeliers. But it was mine, paid for in cash, no debt, no show. Simone would have hated it. She'd called it depressing the one time she visited after we separated. I just shrugged. To me, it was freedom. I didn't need her approval or anyone's. I thought about her brunch, the way her friends laughed like they were in on some big secret. They didn't know me. They didn't know I'd turned down a hedge fund job because I didn't want to play their game. Suits, schmoozing, egos. I'd chosen my own path. Slow, steady, invisible. And it worked. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from my dad, checking in. "You okay, son? Heard about the divorce." I typed back, "I'm fine. Just moving forward." He didn't know the half of it, either. No one did. That was the thing about wealth like mine. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. I sat back down, scrolling through my dashboard again. A solar project in Kenya was hitting its targets. A coding boot camp I'd funded in Chicago had just graduated its first class. Small wins, stacking up. I wondered what Simone would say if she saw this, her poor ex-husband, quietly shaping the world. Would she care? Probably not. She'd only see what wasn't there. The yacht, the penthouse, the spotlight she craved. I closed my laptop, the screen going dark. The loft felt still, but not empty. I thought about tomorrow, about what came next. Simone had made her move, her text, her announcement, her laughter. She thought she'd written the end of our story. But she hadn't. I wasn't done yet. I didn't know how, but I'd let the truth come out. Not for her, not for revenge, but for me. Because I was tired of being invisible to the one person who should have seen me. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood there, staring at the sink. The city kept humming outside, indifferent. And in that moment, I made a choice. I'd stop hiding. Not with a big show, not with her kind of noise. But on my terms, in my time. I'd let the world see who Grant Ellison really was. And when they did, Simone would have to face the man she'd thrown away, not with anger, but with the quiet truth of everything I'd built. I was at my desk the next morning, coffee cooling beside me, when my phone buzzed with an email from a friend who worked at a finance magazine. The subject line read, "You might want to see this." I clicked it open, and there it was, a feature in an exclusive publication titled The Invisible Billionaire. My stomach dropped. They'd used a pseudonym, but it was me, my investments, my strategies, even a blurry photo from an awards ceremony I'd attended last year. The article called me a ghost in global finance, someone who'd built a fortune without a single headline. It wasn't wrong, but seeing it out there, public, felt like someone had ripped the curtain off my life. I leaned back, staring at the screen. I'd always kept my work quiet, partly because I liked it that way, partly because I didn't trust people's reactions. Money changed how they saw you, and I didn't want that noise. But now the secret was out, or at least starting to leak. I wondered who'd tipped them off, maybe a colleague I trusted, maybe someone who'd pieced it together. Didn't matter. It was done. I clicked through the article again, skimming the details. They'd gotten most of it right. The energy fund, the startup investments, the anonymous donations. They didn't have my real name, but that photo was clear enough for anyone who knew me. I set my phone down and rubbed my eyes. Part of me wanted to call the magazine, ask them to pull it. But another part, the part that remembered Simone's laugh at brunch, wanted it to spread. Not for spite, but because I was done being the shadow she'd painted me as. I spent the day working, trying to focus on my dashboard, but my mind kept drifting to that article. By evening, my phone started buzzing again. Texts, emails, a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Word was getting out. I ignored most of it, but one message caught my eye. A friend from college, saying the article was making rounds in finance circles. "People are losing it, man," he wrote. "They want to know who you are." I didn't reply. Instead, I went for a walk, the city air cool against my skin. The streets were busy, people laughing, cars crawling past, neon signs flickering. I felt exposed, like everyone could see the article written on my face. But they didn't. They just saw a guy in a hoodie, blending in. That's how I'd always lived, under the radar, moving carefully. Simone had hated that about me. She wanted a husband who'd shine, who'd match her curated life. I wasn't that guy. I was the one who'd rather fund a school than buy a sports car. I got back to my loft and checked my phone again. More messages, including one from a name I hadn't expected. Ava, Simone's real estate friend from brunch. "Is this you?" she'd written, with a link to the article. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. But it meant the news was reaching Simone's world now, and that thought made my pulse quicken. I could picture her face, scrolling through the article, seeing that photo. Would she laugh it off? Or would it hit her like it had hit me, hard, undeniable? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next day, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I ignored it, but it rang again, and again. On the fourth try, I picked up. already knowing who it was. Grant. Simone's voice was tight, like she was holding her breath. Did you see it? I stayed quiet for a second, letting her squirm. Yeah, I said finally. I saw it. She started talking fast, words tumbling over each other, how Ava had shown her the article at brunch, how everyone had gone silent, how her glass had slipped and shattered on the floor. Is it true? She asked. Is that you? I leaned against my kitchen counter, the phone cool against my ear. What do you think? I said, not giving her anything. She made a sound, half laugh, half gasp. You never said anything. You let me think. She stopped, and I could hear her breathing, sharp and uneven. I didn't fill the silence. This wasn't my moment to explain, it was hers to face. I have to go, I said, and hung up. The loft was quiet after that, just the hum of the fridge and the distant city noise. I sat down, opened my laptop, and looked at the article again. The photo stared back, a version of me I barely recognized, smiling faintly at some gala I'd forgotten. Simone had seen it now. Her poor ex-husband wasn't so poor after all. But I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt free. Like the weight of her words, her laughter, was finally starting to lift. The morning after Simone's call, my phone wouldn't stop. Notifications piled up, texts, voicemails, emails from people I hadn't heard from in years. Most were curious, some were nosy, a few were outright asking for money. I muted everything and set the phone face down on my desk. The article about the invisible billionaire was spreading faster than I'd expected, and I wasn't ready for the noise. I poured a coffee and stood by my loft's window, watching the city wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled past, a jogger weaved through pedestrians. Life kept moving. I wanted to stay in that quiet moment, but my phone buzzed again. Simone, for the 14th time in a row. I sighed, knowing she wouldn't stop. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grant, finally. Her voice was high, panicked, like she'd been running. Why didn't you tell me? You let me make a fool of myself. Do you know how bad this looks? I stayed calm, leaning against the counter. You said I wasn't worth your time. I agreed. She gasped, then launched into a tirade, screaming about betrayal, accusing me of hiding things, pleading for a chance to talk it out, all in one breath. It was a storm of words, desperate and unhinged. I listened, not reacting, just letting her spill. I never hid anything, I said when she paused for air. You never looked past the surface. She screamed again, a sound that made my ear ache. You could have said something. You watch me, everyone. Think you were nothing. I didn't argue. There was no point. She wasn't hearing me, she was hearing her own embarrassment, her own choices staring back at her. I'm done here, Simone, I said, and hung up. The silence in the loft felt heavier after that, but not bad. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. Her words kept circling. Why didn't I tell her? I'd asked myself that 100 times, especially after her text about the divorce. But the truth was simple. I didn't tell her because I didn't need to. My life wasn't about impressing her, or anyone. I built what I had for me, for the things I believed in: schools, clinics, startups that could change lives. Simone wanted a stage. I wanted substance. I thought about the years we'd spent together, how I tried to bridge our worlds. I'd go to her parties, stand in the corner while she worked the room. I'd listen to her talk about her brand, her followers, her vision. I thought she'd grow out of it, find her way back to the woman who'd laughed about llamas in a bookstore. But she didn't. She leaned harder into the flash, and I stayed in the shadows. Maybe that's where we lost each other. My phone buzzed again, not Simone this time, but a text from my mom. Saw the news. Is that really you? I smiled, typing back. Yeah, Mom. It's me. She didn't know the half of it either. No one did. Not really. I'd kept my parents in the dark, not out of secrecy, but because I didn't want to change how they saw me. They were happy in their small Midwest town, proud of their son, the consultant. If they knew the numbers, they'd worry, or worse, they'd brag. I didn't want that. I opened my laptop, pulled up my dashboard. The numbers were steady, as always, my anchor in all this chaos. I clicked through to a scholarship fund I'd set up for low-income students. Applications were coming in, stories of kids who reminded me of myself at their age, hungry to learn, scared they'd never get the chance. That's why I did this, why I stayed quiet. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it could do when no one was watching. Simone's call kept nagging at me, though. Not her anger, but her question. Why didn't I tell her? Maybe I should have, early on, when we were still trying. But by the end, it wouldn't have mattered. She didn't want me, she wanted a version of me that didn't exist, one that'd match her Instagram grid. I wasn't that guy. I never would be. I closed the laptop and stood, stretching my arms. The city hummed outside, indifferent to my drama. Simone could scream all she wanted, but it wouldn't change what was. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. Done carrying her judgment, done letting her define me. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. A walk would clear my head, help me figure out what came next. Because one thing was clear, this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the start of something else. The days after Simone's meltdown felt like the calm after a storm. Quiet, but you could still feel the damage in the air. I kept my routine simple: coffee, work, walks through the city to clear my head. But the world wasn't letting me stay invisible anymore. The article about the invisible billionaire had spread beyond finance circles, popping up on social media, even getting a mention on a morning talk show. My phone stayed on silent, but I couldn't ignore the ripple effect. Simone's circle, her precious elite crowd, was starting to crack. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine, mutual acquaintances who'd text me updates, half out of curiosity, half out of pity. Ava, the real estate influencer, had stopped inviting Simone to her brunches. Mason, the hedge fund guy, was dodging her calls. Bianca, the vlogger, had posted something cryptic about fake friends that everyone assumed was aimed at Simone. I didn't seek this out. It just found me, like debris washing up after a wreck. I sat at my desk, scrolling through my investment dashboard, trying to focus on numbers instead of gossip. The markets were steady, my solar project in Kenya hitting new milestones. But my mind kept drifting to Simone's world falling apart. I didn't feel good about it, not exactly. I wasn't out for revenge, but I couldn't pretend it didn't sting to know she was hurting. Part of me still remembered the woman I'd loved, the one who'd made me believe in forever. That part wanted to call her, to see if she was okay. But I didn't. She'd built this mess, not me. My phone lit up with a call from my parents, their names flashing on the screen. I answered, bracing for questions. "Grant, we saw that article," my dad said, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. "Is that really you? All that money?" I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my neck. "Yeah, Dad. It's me." My mom's voice came through next, softer. "Why didn't you tell us, honey? We thought you were just, getting by." I smiled, even though they couldn't see it. I liked it better that way. Didn't want things to change. They were quiet for a moment, and I could picture them in their living room, Dad in his old recliner, Mom fussing with a dish towel. "We're proud of you," Dad said finally. "Always have been." That hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, told them I'd visit soon, and hung up. Their words stayed with me, grounding me in a way the numbers on my screen never could. Simone's parents were a different story. I got a text from her mom, Ellen, later that day, short, apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Grant. I didn't know. None of us did." I didn't reply. What was there to say? They'd watched Simone tear me down at brunch, laughed along or stayed silent. Now they were scrambling, but it wasn't my job to fix their guilt. I heard her dad was confused, asking around about what went wrong. Her new boyfriend, or whatever he was, had ghosted her, probably spooked by the drama. I tried to push it all out of my head, focus on what mattered. My loft was still my sanctuary. Books on the shelves, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, no trace of Simone's chaos. I liked it that way. I opened my laptop again, checked on a scholarship fund I'd set up. A new batch of thank you letters had come in from students, kids who'd gotten a shot at college because of me. One wrote about her mom crying when she got the acceptance letter. That's what kept me going, not Simone's fallout or the world's sudden interest in my bank account. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of her circle turning on her. Bianca's vlog had gone viral. Her comment about throwing away diamonds for rhinestones hitting harder than she probably meant. I watched it once, saw the comments piling up, people calling Simone shallow, saying she'd fumbled the bag. It was brutal, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd chosen that world, those people. Now she was living with it. I stood and walked to the window, the city stretching out below. The article had changed things, not just for Simone, but for me. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I'd always liked the quiet, the freedom of moving without eyes on me. But maybe there was something to be said for stepping into the light, not for applause, but for truth. Simone's world was fracturing, but mine was still whole. And that was enough for now. The Investors Summit invitation came out of nowhere, a sleek email from a conference organizer who'd read the Invisible Billionaire article. They wanted me to speak, share my unique approach to finance. I stared at the message for a long time, my coffee going cold on the desk. Public speaking wasn't my thing, never had been. I liked working behind the scenes, letting my results do the talking. But something about the request stuck with me. Maybe it was the chance to set the record straight, not just about my wealth, but about who I was. I said yes, reluctantly, and spent the next week second-guessing myself. The day of the summit, I stood backstage, tugging at the collar of my new blazer. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of faces, all waiting to hear from the guy who'd stayed under the radar for years. My palms were sweaty, but I forced myself to breathe. When they called my name, I walked out, the spotlight hot on my face. The crowd was quiet, expectant. I gripped the podium and started talking, not just about markets or strategies, but about something deeper. The greatest freedom, I said, is not having to prove your worth to anyone. I told them about building wealth quietly, about choosing impact over applause. I didn't mention Simone, but her shadow was there, and every word about living true to yourself. The room listened, really listened, and when I finished, the applause was loud but not overwhelming. I felt okay, like I'd said what I needed to. The video of my talk went viral by the next day, shared across finance blogs, social media, even news sites. I didn't watch it, but I saw the notifications pile up. Messages from strangers, colleagues, even a few old classmates. Most were supportive, some were skeptical, calling me a myth or a fluke. I let it roll off me. I'd said my piece. The world could do what it wanted with it. What I didn't expect was the flood of emails from nonprofits, young investors, even kids asking for advice. One stood out, a note from Simone's younger sister, Camille. I hadn't seen her in years. She was always the quiet one, overshadowed by Simone's spotlight. Her message was short but hit hard. "Thank you for funding the mental health program at my school," she wrote. "It saved my friend's life. I had no idea it was you." I sat there, staring at the screen, my throat tight. I'd forgotten about that donation, a small grant I'd sent to a local college a year ago. To me, it was just another line item. To Camille, it was everything. I typed a quick reply, keeping it simple. "Glad I could help. Tell your friend I'm rooting for her." I didn't mention Simone, and neither did she. But the email stayed with me, a reminder of why I did this, why I'd kept it quiet for so long. The summit had shifted something in me. I'd spent years avoiding attention, thinking it would complicate things. But standing on that stage, I'd felt seen, not as a number, but as a person. People were starting to piece together who I was, the guy who'd funded schools, backed startups, helped without asking for credit. It wasn't about the money, it was about the choices I'd made, the life I'd built. I went back to my routine, coffee, spreadsheets, walks through the city, but it felt different now. My loft was still my haven, but it didn't feel like a hideout anymore. I answered a few of the emails, mostly from kids asking how to start investing. I kept my advice practical: save early, learn the markets, don't chase trends. But I added something else: find what matters to you, not what looks good on paper. I thought about Simone, about her world of optics and applause. She'd never understood that, never wanted to. Now, with her circle crumbling and my name out there, I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. Not that it mattered anymore. I was done trying to fit her frame. I closed my laptop and leaned back, the city humming outside. Camille's email was still open on my screen, a small light in all this noise. I didn't need the world's approval, but I didn't mind them seeing me now, not for fame, but for the truth of who I'd always been. I was reading in my loft, a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the buzzer rang. I set my book down, confused. No one dropped by unannounced. I checked the intercom screen and froze. Simone stood outside, dressed in a plain sweater and jeans, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked like the woman I'd met years ago, not the polished version from brunch. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the button. Part of me wanted to ignore her, let her stand there and leave. But something, curiosity, maybe, or closure, made me buzz her up. She knocked softly, and I opened the door. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, but she held herself steady. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, stepping aside. She walked in, glancing around my loft like she was seeing it for the first time. No marble, no flash, just books, a worn couch, my desk with its scattered papers. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tight. I leaned against the counter, waiting. "I'm sorry," she started, looking at the floor. "For everything. The divorce, the brunch," what I said. I was lost, caught up in things that don't matter. Her words came slow, like she was pulling them from deep inside. "I didn't see you, Grant." "Not really." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. She went on, saying she'd been blinded by pressure, her friends, her followers, the need to be someone important. I thought you were holding me back, she said, finally meeting my eyes. But I was wrong. You're incredible. Her voice broke, and she wiped her cheek. I felt a pang, not love, but something softer, pity, maybe. I'd spent months replaying her laughter, her cruelty, but seeing her now, stripped down and raw, I didn't feel angry, just distant. I appreciate that, I said, keeping my tone even. But it's done, Simone. She flinched, like she'd hoped for more. Can't we try again? She asked, leaning forward. I see you now. I get it. Your work, your heart. We could rebuild. I shook my head, gentle but firm. You weren't wrong about one thing. I don't belong in your circle. I built my own. Her face crumpled, tears spilling faster. I messed up, she whispered. I threw away something real. I didn't argue she wasn't wrong, but I wasn't here to fix her regret. I walked to the door, opening it slowly. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. But it's not here. She stood, shaky, and walked past me. At the threshold, she turned, like she might say more, but I closed the door before she could. The click of the lock echoed in the quiet loft. I stood there, staring at the wood, waiting for, what? Relief? Sadness? I felt both, tangled together. Simone's apology was real, I could tell, but it didn't erase the past. She'd seen me too late, and I wasn't the same man she'd left. I went back to my chair, picked up my book, but didn't read. Instead, I thought about the years we'd lost, her chasing a life that wasn't hers, me building one she'd never understand. I didn't hate her. I didn't even miss her, not really. What I missed was the idea of us, the hope we'd started with. That was gone, and no apology could bring it back. Outside, the city kept moving, cars, voices, life. My loft felt still, but not empty. I'd meant what I said. I'd built my own circle. Not of influencers or elites, but of purpose, projects, people, small wins that added up. Simone wanted a second chance, but I didn't need one. I was already whole. I set the book down and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. She was probably still out there, walking to her car, crying or cursing or both. I wished her well, in my own way, but I didn't look back. The door was closed on her, on us, on the weight of her choices. I was free, not because she'd apologized, but because I'd chosen to be. I stepped off a plane in Nepal, the air sharp with mountain cold, and felt a quiet thrill settle in my chest. The rural school I'd helped fund was just a bumpy Jeep ride away, tucked in a valley where kids walked miles for a chance to learn. I'd come to see it myself, not for photos or praise, but because I needed to feel the ground under my feet, to know my work was real. The past few months had been a blur, Simone's apology, the summit speech, the world's sudden interest in me. I'd needed to step away, to remember why I'd started this in the first place. The school was small, just a few classrooms with colorful walls and desks worn smooth by little hands. The principal, a woman with kind eyes, showed me around, pointing out the new roof, the books I'd paid for. Kids peered at me, curious, some giggling behind their hands. I smiled, waved, felt my heart loosen. This was it. This was enough. From Nepal, I flew to Kenya, checking on a clean water project I'd backed. The village was alive with noise, women chatting, kids chasing a soccer ball, pipes humming with fresh water. An elder shook my hand, his grip strong, and thanked me in halting English. I nodded, said it was my honor. I didn't stay long, just enough to see the pumps working, to know the money had done what it was meant to. Next was a tech startup in Eastern Europe, a team of young coders building software to track renewable energy. They were scrappy, passionate, the kind of people I'd bet on years ago. We talked shop over cheap coffee, and I left them with a promise of more funding if they hit their next milestone. Back in my loft weeks later, I felt grounded again. The city hummed outside, same as always, but I was different, calmer, clearer. I sat at my desk, updating my portfolio, the numbers ticking along like old friends. A mentorship program I joined was starting soon, pairing me with kids who wanted to learn finance. I'd already met a few, sharp, hungry, full of questions. I liked that. It kept me sharp, too. I thought about Simone, about that Easter brunch when she'd laughed and called me too poor. It felt like a lifetime ago. Her words had cut deep then, but now they just didn't. I could still hear her voice, the way it cracked when she apologized, the way she looked at me like I was her last chance. I didn't hate her for it. I didn't even pity her anymore. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. True wealth wasn't the numbers on my screen, though they helped. It was this, the freedom to live my way, to build what mattered, to help without needing a spotlight. I'd spent years in the shadows, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need anyone's permission to be me. And yet, I'd still chosen to lift others up, quietly, always quietly. My phone buzzed, a text from Camille, Simone's sister, checking in about the mental health program. I smiled, typed back a quick reply. She didn't bring up Simone, and neither did I. The past was done, buried under new projects, new plans. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Lights blinked in the distance, each one a story I'd never know. Mine was still unfolding, not loud or flashy, but real. I thought about those kids in Nepal, the water in Kenya, the coders with their big dreams. That's what I'd chosen, not a stage, not applause, but purpose. Simone had wanted more, always more. I'd wanted enough. And standing there, alone in my loft, I knew I'd found it.